Camilla Parker Bowles has had a very rough few weeks, and from everything, sources are saying it's only going to get worse from here. There is a story developing inside Buckingham Palace right now that honestly feels like it has been building for 30 years. And it involves two of the most unlikely people joining forces: Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Prince William. And the target: the woman sitting right next to King Charles at every official engagement. The woman who spent decades as the other woman and eventually became Queen Consort. According to sources close to the palace, that position is not as secure as Camilla would like the world to believe. Let's start with what actually kicked this off, because there was a specific moment that made people inside the palace sit up and pay attention. About 3 weeks before this story started circulating, Catherine's senior private secretary made a phone call that sources describe as deeply unusual. Not to the press, not to a government minister, to a senior solicitor in London on behalf of the Princess of Wales. About Camilla. The call lasted less than 10 minutes. Short, precise, the kind of conversation someone has when they have already made the decision and just need to confirm the path is clear. That call, sources say, was the first move in something much bigger. Now watch this next part very carefully because it shows you exactly why nothing Camilla does right now is going to work. If you are new to this channel, hit subscribe right now, because the kind of sources and details I am about to walk through are exactly what gets buried by the palace press office every single week. Catherine married into this family in 2011 as a 29-year-old with no aristocratic blood, no royal upbringing. She walked in knowing exactly what she was marrying into. Not the polished version, but the real version, because William made sure of that before she ever said yes. She has watched over 15 years as the woman her husband grew up calling the third person in his parents' marriage was rehabilitated, celebrated, and crowned beside the man whose infidelity made her future husband a 15-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin. So the natural question is why now? Why 2026? Sources say the answer has two parts, and you need both of them to understand what is actually going on here. The first part is William's position. It has fundamentally changed over the past 18 months. He is not just waiting in the wings anymore. He is making real financial decisions with real consequences. And the Duchy of Cornwall is where you can see it most clearly. £1.2 billion in land, property and investments. All of it under his direct control. No consultation required. The clearest public signal came when he removed Annabel Elliot from the duchy payroll. That is, Camilla's younger sister, interior designer, worked across duchy properties under Charles for nearly 20 years, earning anywhere between £19,000 and £82,000 annually. The moment William took over, her name stopped appearing in the financial records. No public dispute, no statement, just gone. And she was not replaced with a neutral hire. William brought in his own people, loyal specifically and exclusively to him. That decision sent a message that did not need any translation. Catherine watched that happen. According to sources, she approved completely. And sources suggest that decision opened a conversation between Catherine and William that had been waiting years to take place, because both of them, for very different but deeply personal reasons, had reached the same point at roughly the same time. Done waiting. The second part is Diana. August 31st. 2027 will be 30 years since she died in that Paris tunnel. 30 years since William at 15 had to walk behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London in front of the entire world. He is now 43, a husband, a father of 3, and in nearly 30 years of public life, he has never once made a direct statement connecting his feelings about Camilla to his feelings about what his mother went through. He never had to. His actions have been making that statement consistently for years. Sources say Catherine reached a point sometime in the past several months where she decided she was done. Done watching institutional loyalty override the memory of a woman she has spent 15 years publicly honoring. Catherine, who married the son Diana left behind, who carries Diana's name into every royal engagement she does, allegedly decided it was time to act on it. And when she acted, she had access to something that is now making certain people inside Buckingham Palace genuinely nervous. There is a project underway at Kensington Palace that has not yet been publicly announced. It is being referred to inside the household as the Diana Centenary Archive. No press, no documentary crews. What it contains is the assembled body of materials connected to Diana's life, her personal correspondence, her charity files, her private scheduling diaries from the early 80s through 1997, the written record of what was actually happening inside the institution during the most turbulent decades of the 20th century. Catherine's access to those materials at a level very few people outside the immediate family possess, and sources suggest she has been reviewing them personally. The question worth sitting with is what exactly is in those files from the 80s and 90s that certain people allegedly do not want surfacing right now. The broad strokes are already public knowledge. The 1992 separation, the Camilla-gate tapes in 1993, Charles's television confession in 1994, Diana's Panorama interview in 1995, the divorce in 1996, Diana's death in 1997. What sources suggest is in those files goes beyond the broad strokes. It is the specificity, the private contemporaneous written record of who knew what, when they knew it, who facilitated what, and how. How Diana's concerns were received and handled. How the institution managed the situation where one of its members was suffering in a very documented and very public way. According to sources familiar with Catherine's alleged archival review, the materials tell a story about institutional failure that goes considerably further than anything publicly available has ever documented. And sources say Catherine believes that story deserves to be part of the complete historical record, not shaped or softened by the preferences of the people who would rather it stayed in the dark. Camilla is one of those people. Pay close attention right here, because this next section ties everything together, and it is the part no one is talking about yet. Drop a comment telling me whether you think this actually changes how Camilla operates from here, because the answer is going to surprise you. Now, let's talk about what William is doing simultaneously. The Duchy of Cornwall generated approximately £30 million in a single year in 2025. Tenant farms, holiday cottages, the Isles of Scilly, Dartmoor land rights. Every pound of it controlled solely by William. And sources suggest he has been using that control with a precision that people inside Camilla's circle are only now fully appreciating. Access to crown events, proximity to official royal occasions, invitations extended to members of Camilla's wider circle quietly withdrawn. Appearances where Parker Bowles family members had expected to be present restructured without explanation. The same slow, deliberate, entirely deniable narrowing of access applied more broadly across every connection between Camilla's family and the institution William controls. Nothing that generates a headline on its own. Everything that adds up to something unmistakable. And then there is the Diana dimension. William has been quietly redirecting certain duchy-connected philanthropic resources toward causes Diana originally championed: mental health, homelessness, HIV awareness. the ones the establishment initially resisted her championing because they were considered too raw for a senior royal. Diana touched them anyway and paid an institutional price. Now her son controls $1.2 billion in assets, and is pointing a portion of that toward exactly the places his mother pointed when the institution she belonged to was actively working to contain her. Sources say Catherine has privately expressed what in anyone less disciplined you would just call satisfaction, because what she is allegedly doing with the archive and what William is allegedly doing with the duchy represent what sources describe as a two-front operation. History and money, the past and the future, both being reshaped at the same time by the two people in this family, with the most personal reasons to reshape them. And Camilla is caught directly in the middle. Her ceremonial position is being affected too, in a way that is easy to miss unless you are watching for it. When Camilla walked into Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May, 2023, wearing the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, Queen Elizabeth's personal favorite, it was a carefully chosen signal that her position was fully legitimate. For her supporters, a triumphant moment. For others inside that palace, sources suggest it was a clock starting, because that tiara will one day sit on Catherine's head as queen consort. And when it does, the symbolic transfer will be so total that everything Camilla's coronation moment represented will effectively be overwritten. Sources suggest Catherine understands that perfectly, and she is not waiting passively. Camilla has spent 2 decades accumulating royal patronages, charitable associations, ceremonial roles that give her position substance beyond simply being Charles's wife. Sources suggest that accumulation is allegedly being interrupted. When Queen Elizabeth died, she held hundreds of royal patronages, and the redistribution has been ongoing since 2022. Sources suggest Catherine has allegedly been involved in certain patronage decisions in ways that have quietly shaped that redistribution. Specific high-profile patronages that were being positioned for Camilla allegedly redirected through quiet reallocation that sources describe as reflecting priorities rather than logistics. In 2025, Charles granted William and Catherine the authority to issue royal warrants, a privilege monarchs have historically guarded carefully, a public signal about where the crown's symbolic weight is being deliberately repositioned toward the next generation, away from the current reign and everything associated with it, including Camilla. Sources describe her private reaction as the response of someone watching their own carefully constructed image being methodically and permanently taken apart. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 100 quiet ones, each individually deniable and collectively devastating. Then there is her personal situation. Camilla sold Ray Mill House. No press release, no lifestyle magazine feature. The Wiltshire retreat she had owned since before she married Charles, the place she publicly described as her personal escape. Gone. People do not sell their personal sanctuaries casually unless something has shifted fundamentally in how they see their own future. When Charles dies, Sandringham passes to William, Balmoral passes to William. Buckingham Palace becomes William and Catherine's primary official residence. The properties Camilla currently moves through as of right become properties she can only access at William's invitation. Her likely inheritance consists of Clarence House, valued at approximately £72 million, and Highgrove, valued at around £39 million. Significant assets, completely inadequate as a substitute for the position she currently occupies. She would go from queen consort to a private citizen living in 2 houses at the discretion of a man who grew up watching what she did to his mother. The family dimension compounds everything. Annabel Elliot gone from the duchy payroll. Tom Parker Bowles's access to royal spaces allegedly finished following the Balmoral situation. The Parker Bowles family's broader proximity to Crown events quietly narrowing. Camilla spent 20 years building a network of access for her children and siblings inside the institution she married into. Sources suggest William and Catherine are dismantling it piece by piece, with a patience that speaks to genuine long-term intent rather than temporary frustration. And then there is the Sarah Ferguson situation. Ferguson's name appears in the Epstein files released by the United States Department of Justice. There is no evidence of criminal wrongdoing, but the association is real. Sources suggest William has made his position completely clear to Camilla. Distance yourself from Ferguson publicly and permanently, or accept the consequences. Camilla has not fully complied. Catherine views her continued loyalty as evidence of exactly the kind of judgment failure that justifies concerns about Camilla's fitness to represent the institution going forward. That standoff is unresolved, and sources suggest it is costing Camilla influence inside the palace with every week it continues. Now, here is where the story gets genuinely complicated, because sitting in the middle of all of this is Charles. He made a phone call to Catherine in February of this year that sources describe as one of the most difficult conversations between a father-in-law and his daughter-in-law in decades. Not angry, not accusatory, quiet and pained. The call of a man who understands exactly what his daughter-in-law is doing and finds himself completely unable to argue against it with any real conviction. The call lasted 40 minutes and ended with nothing resolved. He is 76 years old. He was diagnosed with cancer in February 2024. Treatment continued throughout 2024 and into 2025. But discipline is not the same as strength, and keeping up appearances is not the same as having the capacity to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Protecting Camilla would mean telling William to restore access to people he deliberately removed. William would not comply, and Charles knows it. It would mean telling Catherine to stop whatever she is allegedly doing with the Diana archive. Catherine would not comply, and Charles knows that too. It would mean positioning himself publicly against both his heir and his daughter-in-law simultaneously, in defense of the woman that millions of people still associate with his first wife's suffering. The political and personal cost of that position is one Charles simply cannot afford. But here is the dimension of Charles's position that sources describe as the most painful of all. He knows why William and Catherine feel the way they feel because he was there, and he was the cause of it. He is the man who conducted the affair that Diana described in terms of profound personal devastation. He is the reason that grief exists. How do you argue against your son's grief over his mother when you are the reason that grief exists in the first place? How do you tell your daughter-in-law that protecting your wife's position matters more than honoring the memory of the woman whose name she has carried into every royal engagement she has ever done? Sources suggest Charles cannot make either of those arguments with genuine conviction, because he does not fully believe them himself. There is a comment Charles allegedly made to a senior aide during this period that sources describe as quietly revealing. He did not express anger at William. He did not express frustration with Catherine. He allegedly expressed understanding. The understanding of a man who knows that the people moving against his wife are doing so for reasons he himself created, and who has no answer for that. So what does all of this actually add up to? Because there is a version of this story that looks like revenge, and there is another version that looks like something more considered and more lasting than revenge. Sources suggest the second version is closer to the truth. Simple revenge would look like Camilla publicly humiliated in one dramatic moment. That is not what sources describe William and Catherine as building. What sources describe is more patient, more permanent, and ultimately more meaningful. Think about what Diana actually stood for. Not the fairy tale image, but the real substance. She touched AIDS patients when the establishment was still treating the disease as something shameful. She walked through active minefields in Angola to make a political point about weapons killing civilians. She sat with homeless people and treated them as fully human in a way that senior royals simply were not supposed to do. She did all of this against the active resistance of an institution that found her emotional directness threatening. She was right about all of it. The institution was wrong. And William knows this, not as historical analysis, but as his lived personal experience. He watched his mother be right, while the institution punished her for it. Now he runs the institution. Sources suggest William's modernization agenda is not simply good management practice. It is Diana expressed institutionally. The emotional intelligence, she was told, was inappropriate. The public accountability, she was told, was dangerous. All of it being built into the architecture of the monarchy. William is constructing. Catherine's contribution runs parallel. 15 years of patient, genuinely impactful public work that represents a living argument against performative royalty, and the exact argument Diana made and paid everything to make. And here is what sources suggest Camilla is slowly and painfully coming to understand. She won the battle. She got Charles, the title, the coronation, the tiara, the seat beside the king. But the war was never about Charles. It was about Diana and what Diana represented, and whether the institution Diana tried to change would eventually become something worthy of the price she paid. William and Catherine are allegedly building that institution now, not for revenge, for Diana. And Camilla has no counter-strategy for that. You cannot argue against a legacy. You cannot litigate grief. You cannot outmaneuver a son who watched his mother die and spent 28 years deciding quietly and deliberately what to do about it. And you cannot outmaneuver the daughter-in-law who loved him enough to spend 15 years inside that grief with him. Diana never got to see what this monarchy could become. She got a Paris tunnel, 2 boys without a mother, and a family that barely lowered its flag. But sources suggest something is happening inside that palace right now that she never lived to see. Her son and her daughter-in-law moving together, quietly and permanently, reshaping everything Camilla built into something Diana would have recognized as hers. Not revenge. Something better than revenge. Legacy. And that, more than any property dispute or payroll decision or symbolic tiara, is what sources describe as Camilla's darkest reality in decades. If this story hit you the way it hit me, hit subscribe right now, because the next installment of this series is going to show you what Camilla actually does next, and it is not the move the palace press office wants you to see.